In this video we complete step 37, Pivot Tables Part 2. So in the last video we extracted all the underlying NumPy arrays for the row, column, and value data, if it exists. And then we also classified our pivot table as either having just columns, just rows, or both rows and columns with the string all. So now that we've got our data and that we've classified what type of pivot table that we're going to be creating, we need to divide the data into groups. So this is a little bit easier seen by looking at the data itself. So let's go ahead, let me delete these. Let's go ahead and look at our data. So when I say divide the data into groups, so let's just say we are creating a pivot table where we want, we're going to say just the rows are state, the values are going to be weight, and the ag func here is going to be sum. So what we want to complete this successfully, what we have to do is map all of the weights for Texas into one list or one array, and map all of the weights for Florida into another one. So we have to perform some sort of grouping here. So if we were to do this manually, you would just simply go through this, you would iterate through here one by one, and whenever you encountered state of Texas, you would append this value to the values for Texas, and you would then append this value, for instance, to all the other previous values for Florida, and you would go through, and for every single state, every single unique state, at the end would have a list or an array of all the values that were associated with it. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to iterate through the state or the all of the columns to form these unique groups, and then to keep appending whatever the values are for those groups. So let's see how this might work. First of all, we're just going to delete this return statement, so we don't need that anymore. So let's go ahead and iterate through here. So what are we going to iterate through here? So maybe before we do an iteration, we can think about zipping up. Let's just say we're working with only columns. So let's write an if statement first. So if the pivot type, if it's columns, then we only have column data and value data. So what if we zip up the col data right here and the value data? So if we go through here, so we can iterate through this. So we're just going to zip this up. So if we go back over here, it's like zipping up state and weight, for instance, in this area. So if we had columns, for instance, maybe. That's just because I have an error here, so that'll go away. So let's just let's iterate through state or through the column data and the value data, and we'll call this the first one will be the group. So call data, we can just say it's the group, and the second one is val. So these will just be the individual variable names as we're iterating. So what we need to do here is do something like a dictionary that has a list, and it keeps appending values to that end of the dictionary. So we could just create a dictionary, but there's actually a good, there's a good data structure called the default dictionary in the collections module. So we're going to go ahead and use that. So from collections, we're going to import this default dictionary object, and we're going to go ahead and create a default dictionary where its default value is a list. So what this means is every value is automatically, every key is automatically mapped to an empty list if it's not mapped to something already. So what we're going to do here is, so D will be our data, our dictionary. So for every group, we are simply going to append val to it. So that looks good. So we're just literally going to iterate through all of the data that we have if it's columns. So if this is rows, then we're going to do the same thing, except it's going to call row data. Now, so this should work for rows if we just have rows. Otherwise, this means that one more branch here for the case where if we have both rows and columns defined. So this is going to look a little bit different here. So we're going to have two groups here. We'll say group 1, group 2, and val, and we're going to zip up all three. So we have row data, col data, and val data. So we're going to zip these all up. We're going to iterate through each one of those. Now, instead of this just being a group like this, we have two. So we're going to actually make a tuple in here to be the key in our dictionary. So this group 1, group 2 is going to form, this tuple will actually be the group that we're after. Will be the key to the group. So a two-item tuple will be the key to the group, and we will simply append val like that. Okay, so that looks okay. And so it looks like we've collected all of the data. So why don't we go ahead and just return this object here, and return this dictionary right now in its current state, just so we can verify that we've collected everything correctly. So let's go back here and run this again and look at this. Okay, good. So we have it returns a default dictionary, which is exactly what it is. And here's Texas. Texas is mapped to those values. That looks fantastic. That looks great. And Florida is mapped to these values. That's exactly what we wanted. So we're just mapping our group to the values. We could have done it with fruit. So fruit would have worked out as well. It should work for rows here. So here's the same thing if we use rows. Now, if we do columns and rows together, well, let's see if this works. And that looks good. So we actually have a tuple. So apples in Texas are mapped to 5 and 10. Apples in Florida are mapped to 4 and 3, and so forth. So that looks good. So we've created this dictionary, which has as its keys the group, which is either a single string or a tuple of strings. And the values for the dictionary are simply a list of whatever column is in the values column over here. So that's it for this one. I just wanted to collect all the data into each independent group as a dictionary. So yes, that completes part 2 for step 37.